I need it. Go back. Sorry. In case. Okay, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It's Tuesday, right? Okay, thank you. I work in education. I don't know what day of the week it is, so I'm sure some of you can empathize, right? It's June something. So, but we're here. We're here to have a good time. We have two authors here to introduce and discuss their books. We have Raquel Marie, You Don't Have a Shot. And yes. And I apologize. I did not prepare anything for the introductions. And then we also have Ananya. Devarajan. I did not want to butcher that, so thank you. With her new release, Pub Days Today. Kismat Connection. So I'm going to hand it over to Raquel Marie, and let's get this party started.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're working.
Yeah. Okay, well, welcome, everyone. We are here to celebrate Ananya's book.
Yes, thank you.
To get us started, would you like to do the wonderful task of pitching your book to everyone right now?
I have been doing it for 4 years, so yes, I can. I'm the author of Kismat Connection, obviously, and it is my debut young adult romance novel featuring two Indian American childhood best friends who decide to fake date to prove the universe wrong. So it's, 300 pages of a bunch of complexities and hijinks and just a lot of fun, and I really hope you enjoy it.
We have to clap after every single answer.
Every single question, yes.
So the book does come out today. So this is your first event as an official author.
First official launch. Yes.
Yep, we're going to clap after every sentence. How do you feel?
I have a lot of emotions right now. I'm going to be super honest. I was very, very nervous for the last 2 weeks. All my friends know I have had varying sicknesses over the course of the last 3 months because of how nervous I've been. But I think it's the good kind of nervousness where I wrote this book when I was 17, transitioning from high school to my freshman year of college. I wrote most of it in week 0 at UCI. I just met my best friends who I didn't know were going to be my best friends. And it was just the best time to write a magical romance. And I'm reflecting back on it now, 4 years later, and it's just, I'm nervous because of how full circle it feels, and it's just such a great time. I'm super excited about it now.
Well, that's also especially crazy that you wrote it during week 0 of your freshman year, and now you graduate on Sunday.
I graduate on Sunday. Yeah.
Applause again. Okay, I will be reading questions off my phone. I'm not texting in the middle of this.
And if Be Real does go off, we made a plan that we will be taking our Be Real in the middle of this.
Everyone else is free to let us know as well. Okay, so where did the initial inspiration for this book come from? I know you said you started writing it during week 0, but let's hear where it all started.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to shout out my dad really quickly. So the initial inspiration for this book, I don't know if I've ever told him this directly, but we have a joke in our family that my dad, anything that he says or speaks into existence happens within a week or 2. And it's really scary when he's this is going to happen to you. And then a month later, I'm oh my God, did the universe hear you? So I started thinking, because in high school, I was in my rebellious teenage phase as well, where I did not want to believe my parents could control my life in any way. And my dad would say things like this. And then I would say, well, what if I could just totally prove you wrong? And I would never win. And it just didn't make sense in terms of STEM, in terms of the fact that I've always been a very scientific person. So I wanted to kind of write a story that grapples with the idea of how can someone just predict the future? How can someone just be so in contact with the universe? And how does that affect someone who does not believe things like that can happen? So that's how Kismat Connection first started. You have this main character, Madhuri Iyer, who's so STEM focused, so, I control the way that I live my life, and she comes from a family that's known for curses, astrology, magic, and basically controlling the universe at the tip of their tongue. And it's her constantly in a fight with that, and in a fight with herself to see kind of, where that goes. So that's where the inspiration actually started.
How much of the book do you think is similar from that initial first draft? Or what was the drafting process for that first draft?
Yeah, so I always like to say that don't do what I did when drafting this book. I wrote it in 3 months in the course of my fall quarter freshman year. And I'm seeing some reactions to that. So I wrote it really fast, and then the pandemic happened right after I finished writing the book. And I thought, what better time right now than to edit it in 2 months and then just send it out randomly to agents. Like, I have nothing better to do. And I kind of went in with the mindset of most authors are 40. I'm 17. I can afford to take this risk. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And then I got an agent in 2 months. And then I was like, okay, maybe it'll take me a while to get a book deal. And then I got my book deal in 5 months. And I was like, this is moving very, very fast. And the thing is, I wrote my first draft. I got my agent with my second draft ever. I got my book deal with my second draft ever. And I had the naive mistake of thinking that was all the editing I would ever have to do for the rest of my life.
And they bought it. Now I'm done.
No, I'm not done. My editor sends me this 6-page email one day, after I'd gotten my book deal, and she's like, I love this book, but here's everything that needs to be changed about it. You have 2 months to do it, and it's going to be a complete Jenga block rewrite. And what I mean by that is, if chapter 18 is chapter 18, chapter 18 became chapter 3 at the end of this revision, and all the pieces just moved together on this really grand scale of things. So I ended up, the version you're reading right now is draft 10. So we went from draft 2 to draft 10 in 1.5 years, in college, in my 3rd year, and my 4th year, and it's here now, and I'm really proud of it.
Wow, I think this is getting caught on something. I did not know that you went through such a serious revision process throughout that entire thing.
Yeah, no one. Are you okay?
Sounding right? Yes? Okay.
Yeah, so I actually didn't know that I would have to go through such a serious revising process either. My editor did not tell me that when she offered to me. My agent didn't tell me that. And then I just ended up getting that really, really big edit letter and being like, okay, I guess this is what's happening. But I didn't actually have to do all the drafts that I did. I did a lot of them because I wanted to, because I did write this book when I was 17. And at some point you can tell that I was 17 when I wrote this book. And so, at the age of 20, 21, now I was trying to revamp the book so it sounded more like me while still having all the ideals that a 17-year-old would have when writing and reading a romance novel. So that's how it ended up being 10 drafts, but my editor asked for 3 big rewrites.
And is there anything from that initial draft that has stayed the same? It sounds like a lot of stuff changed.
A lot, so it actually didn't change, the content of the book didn't change. It just moved around in order. So a lot of the pacing and all of that kind of changed. Like I said, chapter 18 became chapter 3 and vice versa. But one big thing that did change is I think that the way I wrote Kismat Connection was I kind of let the romance be secondary to a lot of the contemporary parts of the book, like the coming of age or this main character that's figuring out what it means to be Indian American and what that means to her and how that could be different from what that means to her boyfriend, right? So I got so caught up in that because that's the most genuine part of the story for me. That's what I so deeply connected to that I sometimes forgot I was writing a romance novel. So a lot of the things that changed was me adding kissing scenes and stuff that I just forgot to write. And then my editor was like, this is a romance novel. They should kiss at some point. And so that's how it ended up changing the most, I think.
But I feel like that's kind of the steps to writing a good romance is getting that established, getting the characters established on their own so that the romance isn't the only thing going for them entirely.
Oh yeah, I fully believe that. I think that if you can't root for 2 people as individuals, why would you want them to be together? So that's kind of what I spent the majority of my drafts focusing on.
Astrology is a huge aspect of this book. I don't know which one of us is beeping. It's okay. Astrology is a huge aspect of this book. What history do you have with that? Did you have to do research for it? What was the process of that element? And do you want to explain that for people who haven't read the book yet?
Yes. So I actually name drop Vedic astrology a lot in this book. That's kind of what a big focus of it is. I don't have any personal connection to it, actually, which surprises people when I say it out loud. My mom actually makes fun of me for writing about astrology in this book because she's like, we didn't raise you with this concept of astrology. And now everyone's going to think that you come from some weird astrology family. But I think it's just always been something I'm passionate about. I like, thinking about the planets, thinking about the stars, and thinking about how there are ways to kind of describe your personality beyond what you know. And whether it's true science or not, it's a totally different debate. But I knew that I wanted to write a book that kind of let those magical elements come to life, where I could just totally be able to do that and no one would say anything otherwise. So that's how the astrology first started. But I did do a lot of research because the astrology we see now on Instagram, where it's if you're a Scorpio and you crash your car, that makes sense. that's not real astrology. Real astrology, or like Vedic astrology that I was talking about, comes from India. It comes from a form of Hinduism from way back in the day. And so I wanted to do justice to that, and I didn't want it to be a very westernized take. So I did a lot of research to make sure that the representation there was accurate.
Do you like subscribe to any of the stuff that you were reading, or once you were looking at it, were you like, this kind of makes sense for me? Or is it something that you respect more just as an ideology?
So I like respect astrology a lot as as an ideology. I think the whole point of astrology in this book too is that you can believe in anything as long as it feels true to you. So like our main character believes in science, and she like talks a lot of crap on astrology for the majority of the book, but her mom believes in astrology, and at the end of the day they come to the same conclusions through different means. And I think that's the big takeaway here. For me, I didn't really subscribe to it before I started writing this book. Now I think my friends would say I'm really into astrology. Like it comes up in the first 2 times you meet me, and I'm like, you look like a Libra. And then they're like, that doesn't make any sense. But I really like it, and I think researching it has also helped me realize that it's just another way to figure out who you are. So whether you decide to relate to that or not is up to you. But like, I think I have very Sagittarius personality traits, and I like to say that my friends have certain personality traits that represent their astrology sign, but that's just something I like to do.
Do you think these characters fit their astrology signs?
Yes. I actually did not know what signs they were until I was done writing the book. And the whole book is about their signs, which is very weird. But my main character, Madhuri, is a Sagittarius, and she's like me in that her entire chart is Sagittarius. There is no other planet involved for her. And she's like the stereotypical flight risk, running away, like commitment phobe, super like very grounded, you know? And I think that's who I was when I was 16. That is very much not who I am now. But she kind of popped out to me very quickly. And then Arjun is a Scorpio who's like more intense, more emotional by nature. And he does a lot of reflecting throughout the course of this book. And I think that's where his Scorpio nature really comes out.
That's interesting that he's a Scorpio, because he's a very like cinnamon roll type character. I feel like Scorpios don't get that reputation.
Yeah, I feel like Scorpios are always known for being like little vampires that like hate everyone. But in my opinion... Oh, we have a Scorpio in the audience. I'm so sorry. I said that's a stereotype. The way I see Scorpios is that they're fiercely loyal, very passionate, and very like deeply feeling individuals. And that's the representation of Scorpio I wanted to get out. And so that's what Arjun is.
Do you think about like future character astrology signs now? Do you feel like that's going to be a big part of it?
This book has ruined every book I'll ever write. I think I'll always know the star sign of one of my characters now.
So pivoting a little bit away from the actual themes of the book, I know how wild it can be to break out as a published author, as a UCI student. Also, weirdly similar journeys of getting an agent and a book deal as a UCI student.
Rocky and I both went to UCI and both released our debut novels after graduating or near graduation. So, this is why. Zot.
So, how did you balance working on this book and writing projects in general alongside school, especially because your schoolwork is a different subject? You're not an English major.
Yes, I'm not an English major. I'm a neuroscience major, and I'm going to medical school in July, so I'm very excited. So I was constantly doing 20 million things for the last 4 years, and they were all in very, very non-overlapping fields of life. I like to say that I blacked out for the majority of my freshman year, so I don't know how I balanced it. But the real answer is I made writing like the biggest priority for me, because it brought me a sense of peace and comfort when I was not doing well in my STEM classes freshman year. So I went from the kid that got straight A's in all of her science classes in high school to being the bottom of the barrel consistently in college. And I, was starting to get really close to my freshman year roommates and to my friends, but I was away from my family, and I was away from my like 2 best friends from high school who I shared everything with. And suddenly it was like, I have all these feelings I need to get out, and I started writing this book. And it became a form of therapy in a time where I didn't really know who I was. I had just actually made Indian friends for the first time in my life, and that's a big like subplot in my book as well. So those feelings were coming out. But so I made time for it because I had to make time for it for the sake of like my mental health. But what that looked like was I would write, notes on Chipotle napkins when I was going out with my friends. There is a story of me during finals week sitting on top of a running dryer machine in my dorm, just crisscross applesauce, writing my book as the dryer is working underneath me. But that was kind of how I wrote, just in bits and pieces, whenever I had the free time, whenever I had the energy. And then the words just poured out of me so intensely that it was finished in 3 months.
Well, in a way, I almost think it probably helped that you were not working on writing in your classes as well, so you weren't getting burnt out on it all the time. It could still be something that you enjoyed doing while still taking very seriously.
Yeah, exactly. I think I know what that burnout feels now because when I was writing my second book, I was applying to medical school, and that's like 5 essays per school, and I applied to 40 schools. And I remember calling my agent being like, I need another extension because I don't know what words are anymore.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad that was not the situation in which I drafted my first book.
Did you feel like any of your classes at UCI?
USC. We have no connection to USC.
Another college. Do you feel like any of your classes at UCI influenced your writing, or did you ever find something in classes that suddenly you were like, wait, let me do something like this in this book or another?
Yeah, so in the acknowledgement section of my book, actually, I've thanked certain teachers and certain professors that have made an impact on my life. So Kismat Connection, as a brainstorming process, came in my senior year of high school. So Miss Miller is actually right there, and she's my high school AP Lit teacher. And so a big part of her class was talking about characters, and we really analyzed how Hamlet was the most dramatic 17-year-old ever. And that played a role in writing my very dramatic love interest in my book. So there's that. And then at UCI, I have 2 professors, Dr. Radhakrishnan and Dr. Kadandale. Dr. Kadandale is my biochem professor, actually, but he really inspired me to think outside of the box and to not be afraid to put a lot of science in my debut. Because I think at one point I went up to him and I was like, I don't think people are going to want to read my book when there's just so much scientific jargon here. And he was like, well, if that's true to your character story, and if that's true to your story, you should write it. Like, take that risk. And I learned that from him, and that's why the book exists in its shape today. And Dr. Radhakrishnan, yes, he was... Yeah, he's fantastic. He is such an emotional writer. I've read Dr. Radhakrishnan's work. He writes a lot about the Indian American experience, about being an immigrant, and that also plays a big role in Kismat Connection. So his influence is there as well.
I also feel like what that professor said about like the scientific writing, you can tell when you read a book and the author doesn't actually know what the character loves if it's not something they share. So I do think that's cool that you had actual basis of like scientific knowledge to back up your character's scientific interests.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's pretty much my whole life now, science. So it came out in the books whether I like it or not.
You previously wrote on Wattpad. You have a history with Wattpad. Do you think that experience influenced your writing at all, and did it influence your like journey going into publishing? Because for a lot of people, their debut novel is the first time anyone's ever read their writing. But it sounds like people were reading your writing on a very public platform way before you became a traditionally published author.
Yes. So I have a funny story about this. The first book I ever wrote on Wattpad was a young adult thriller novel. It was so bad. It was just awful, right? And it was 100,000 words. It was 52 chapters. It's still on Wattpad today. And I don't know why I admitted that to this group of people. But I wrote it when I was 15 and 16, and it started doing really well on Wattpad. It found an audience. It was one of the few mystery thriller books that had an Indian American character at the time, and I think that's what did it. Because Wattpad, when I was there, was very much the kissing booth, which is like white.
Yeah.
And nothing against that. There just were no Indian kissing booths. So I think people saw my book, and they're like, let me read it. And I ended up getting pretty high up there. I don't know if any of you know Chloe Gong, but me and her actually met on Wattpad. We were like rivals to each other on the charts for like 1 week.
Oh, wow.
And so like
I didn't know this.
Yeah, 2 years later she recognized my name on the internet, and she was like, I was writing under a pseudonym. You were not. I remember you on Wattpad. But I think it was really helpful because when you're 16 years old and you're writing a book and you're writing it weekly, you're not editing it, you're putting it out there because you're just passionate about writing, and then 100 strangers on the internet tell you how bad it is, you're like, okay, you know, do I actually love this because I love it? Is this worth working on? And the answer for me was yes. So I had all these people make valid critiques about my writing, but again, I was 15. And so I ended up just really turning it into, like, changing it from a love to changing it to an art, where you put in the work and you actually try to figure out how to make this a good piece of writing. And so that book, I don't think it's ever going to come back again, but it was like my trial run kind of dummy. I sent it out to publishers. No one liked it. I got a lot of rejections very quickly. But I did have one reader that read it for me and said, you know, I hated this book, and I could not get through it. But the reason I did get through it was because I kind of liked the romance you wrote about. Maybe you should do that instead. And now I'm 17 and thinking, well, I got nothing to lose. Let me write a romance novel. And that's the one you have today. So Wattpad's
wow.
huge for me.
Was Kismat Connection your second book you wrote then?
Second book I've ever
Wow.
written. Yeah.
Wow. Do you ever think you'll go back to thrillers?
No. I love writing about love. Like, I am such a hopeless romantic by nature. I grew up on, like, Bollywood movies. Like, that is my calling. And just as someone who is so appreciative of what it means to love someone in variety of different ways, whether it's familial, whether it's platonic, whether it's romantic, like, I have such a deep connection to that feeling. So I just want to write about that feeling forever.
That's a very funny rebrand to go from thriller to romance.
I actually have a story about that. When I was first writing Kismat Connection, I got to the 8th chapter and I didn't know what to say next, so I killed off one of the main characters because I was writing thrillers for so long, and that's like what you do when you hit a roadblock in a thriller. And then I was like, wait, but I wanted this to be a romance, and so I'd like make him alive again.
To unlearn your thriller tendencies.
Yeah.
That is really funny. Did you work in any other genres, like dabble in anything else?
So my second book, which is coming out next summer, I have not been able... Thank you. I've not been able to announce much publicly yet, but there's more coming about it. I had to actually learn a lot about different genres for my second book because I decided, writing a romance with like curses and magic wasn't enough. I want to write a romance in a time loop.
Ooh, I love a time loop.
I love a time loop too, but they're so hard to write, especially when you
That's
don't
fair.
read science fiction ever. So then I got into a lot of science fiction. My two closest critique partners, they're here today, Kemi and Morgan. They're science fiction fantasy writers, and they like single-handedly are the reason this second book exists, because I would like freak out every 10 chapters and be like, I don't know how to write this. And they'd be like, here, read this. This will teach you how to write science fiction or fantasy. So it's that learning curve all over again.
Well, I was going to ask further along, like, what do you have next? Do you want to talk about your second book now, since we're on the subject?
Yeah, I can. I love my second book. It is the hardest book I've ever had to write. It took me a year and a half to write because writing the first draft of this book meant constantly comparing it to the final draft of my first book.
Yeah.
And that is not something you can compare. Like, draft 10 is not the same as draft 1, especially when draft 1 is being written while you're applying to med school, while you're figuring out all these different things as you become 20, 21, like growing up older. But what I really like about my second book is that it's the first book where I just like openly wrote whatever crazy thing I could put into a romance.
I love when people get in their like self-indulgent era.
I was so self-indulgent with this book. So I was like, I want these two Bollywood dancers. They are co-captains of the same high school team. So this is also an expose on DDN for all the Indian people here. I am going to talk so much crap on DDN in this book, but in like a really loving way, because I love DDN as well. But for anyone who doesn't know, DDN is the Desi Dance Network. It's like every time an Indian person goes to college, they decide whether they want to join a Bollywood dance team and compete in the like country. And I was like, what if I took a bunch of high schoolers and made them compete across the country for Bollywood dance? But then what if I also make the two co-captains break up before nationals? And then what if I make them be stuck in a time loop together where we have to figure out how to fall back in love with each other at this Bollywood dance competition? So that's my second book. And I'm really excited about it.
It sounds very good.
Thank you.
Do we have a title, or are you not allowed to say it yet?
We do have a title. I'm willing to say it because it's probably going to come out soon because we're like looking at covers and stuff too. It's called Sanskari Sweetheart. Sanskari in Hindi is kind of like a ironic way of saying a well-behaved Indian woman, and my main character is anything but well-behaved. So this is like a very sarcastic title, but I think that fits the tone of the book.
Well, it's fun that you have like the alliteration titles for both.
Yeah, that was the point. I actually worked on it with my CP who's Indian but lives in India, so she actually understands the Hindi language way better than I ever could, and we just sat and we talked for hours to get this title down, and it finally worked.
So that's very exciting.
you.
Did you run into any like, well, it sounds like you kind of had some sophomore slump book stuff. I feel like the big thing is, comparing it to whatever more recent work you've done. But how do you feel like the experience compared to drafting the first book as far as like, I don't know, various elements, your feelings toward it, or even just like your strategy toward writing it?
Yeah, my strategy for my first book was that there was no strategy. I just wrote it, and that is not feasible when you start writing as a career because someone's paying you now to do these things, and you're like, oh God, I can't push.
It's a job, and other people want to know what you're doing. It's not just vibes in
Yeah.
your college dorm.
Yeah, it's really not vibes at a college dorm. It's a job, and then like you have people reaching out every 3 weeks asking you, how's it going? Do you have any information? And you can't keep saying no. So that took a big hit with my strategy. So I actually started plotting, but when I plot too much, I lose the love for writing. And a big issue that I had, and my friends and family know this, with writing my second book, the reason it took a year and a half was because I had fallen out of love with writing. Because suddenly, this thing that I had done since I was 6 years old was now someone was paying for it, and it felt like a job, and I didn't want to go to work.
Yeah.
So I just
When you're being told to do it, you suddenly don't want to do it.
yeah, that's exactly what happened. And it was actually really sad because writing had become such a big part of my life, and I had never, ever not wanted to do it. But I ended up really like leaning on my agent. My agent was really helpful for me during this. So she knew when to give me like good feedback and be like, hey, like it's okay, take your time. My CPs were really great. They would read my snippets that were super bad and be like, this is so good, keep going, you know? And we managed to get through it like that. But the book actually almost never came to fruition because right when December timeframe had came, my book was due January 3rd. It was the middle of December, and I still hadn't gotten into medical school yet. And I remember thinking, I'm never going to be a doctor. Why should I even bother with this author thing either? Like, I was in this really bad place then. And I remember telling my agent that, like, oh, I didn't want to write the second book. And she was like, respectfully, you're not going to have a job if you push this deadline once more. Wouldn't it be better if you were an author and not a doctor than neither at all? And then that's how I wrote my second book, I think 30,000 words in 3 days before I flew out to India on my birthday and got into med school the same day.
Iconic week.
It was a big week. But my second book was very emotional. It took a lot, but that's why I love it so much.
Well, it sounds like it's like there's a satisfaction in knowing how much went into that process and then being like, you know what, we made it.
Yeah, like we made it. And I think I love writing now. Like I really do love it again. I'm writing my third book just for fun, and I haven't felt like this since I was 17, so it feels great.
Okay, so we're pivoting back to your first child again. We've given the second child some attention. Your book is dual POV. Did you find one of those perspectives either easier to write than the other? Did you connect with one more? Did one come first over the other? What was that process like?
Yeah, so I always wanted the book to be from Madhuri's point of view, which is our main female character. I always knew that she was going to have her own point of view because she had this really big story of like, I don't know what it means to be Indian, and I don't like it when people keep telling me how to be Indian. And then that's starting to affect the way that she falls in love. That affects the way she handles school. You know, like she had this big story to tell, so I always knew she'd have a point of view. But then Arjun's story came out to me really, really quickly. His was what came to me first, and he stopped being a love interest after one chapter, and he started to become this boy that's struggling with being abandoned by his family, where they're like there and they're financially available, but they're not emotionally available. And he ended up in the situation where he's chasing love from people who don't love him back. And so that was a boy that needed more than just to be like through the eyes of Madhuri. Like he needed his own perspective. And that's why I became dual POV. It was easiest to write Arjun because it was nothing related to anything I knew in my real life. I come from a lovely family who has always been there for me. And so it was easy to write his experience because I could research it and I could talk to people and I could put that on the page. But Madhuri was an issue because she is a mirror to me, and especially to me when I was 17 and going through those same issues. And there was a lot of times where I was like, this feels a little too intimate to write down for people to see. And like you are going to read parts of this book and it's going to be like my heart on the page, which was so hard to do in the moment. But it made it so fulfilling in the end. And I think the reason even my editor bought the book was because she was like, I resonated with Madhuri not knowing what was going on in her life and also kind of being mean as she figured it out. Like she was not a pleasant person to be around until towards the end of the book. But that's my lived experience, and I'm really glad it's there for all the other messy Indian teenage girls. Like, that's why I wrote it in the first place.
Yeah, well, I feel like that type of, like, authentic feeling that you put into a character, it really shows when you're actually reading the book. And usually, yeah, when something feels a little too vulnerable, a little too personal, there's a reason that you still feel compelled to include it into the book for that.
Exactly. It's just scary when you're doing it.
Kind of already answered this, but what parts of each character do you feel like you related to the most?
Yeah, so I did relate to this, not relate to this, I did kind of talk about this earlier, but I actually relate to both Madhuri and Arjun a lot, but in terms of their identities. So Madhuri is very like anti-Indian culture for the first 17 years of her life because she was bullied for being Indian, and that creates a trauma response, especially when you're living in like a mostly Caucasian town. And that's what happened to me earlier in my life. I did not like being Indian because I was told that was not cool. And then I moved to college, and suddenly all my friends were Indian, and they came from places like Fremont, California, where like being Indian is normal. And I was was like, oh, this is like the life I could have had if I was somewhere else, but I have the chance to have that life now. And so that like really kicked off this big coming of age journey for me, where I was starting to embrace my culture. I was making sure people pronounced my name correctly. Like I didn't do that for a long time. And so I ended up becoming Arjun in the last 4 years. Like his POV is most relatable to me now. But when I was writing it at 17, I was fully relating to Madhuri. So it kind of like flipped.
That is cool that both of them represent kind of different points in your life.
Yes, yeah.
There are a lot of side characters in this book. Was there a favorite one for you to write, or are there several if you don't want to pick just one?
I want to pick all of them because they're all like loosely based off of the people I love and adore in my
Talk
real
about
life.
multiple.
Let's talk about multiple. I don't want people to get mad at me. So the Iyer family and Kismat connection is fully based off of my family. And when I mean fully, I mean like exactly. But my parents have been such a huge, like they played such a huge role in my life. And they actually didn't know that I wanted to publish this book when I was doing it. I kind of just walked up to them one day and I was like, I have a literary agent. And they were like, how did you do this? Like, we don't know anything about publishing, but they've been so supportive, and they like do this thing where they research everything extensively the way immigrant parents do, and then they like tell you everything that they learned about publishing, and I'm like, that's love. Thank you so much. And so I wanted to like write an homage to them with the main character's parents in my book. Like they're so supportive of everything that she does, even when she's not deserving of their support. She's supportive of them. And so that was to my parents. My little sister is a huge inspiration for Reina, and Reina is the main character of my second book. So she gets her own book dedicated fully to her, coming out next year. And then there is a character in my book whose last name I actually had to get special permission to use. Ali Gregorick is the like inspiration for Josie Gregorick in the book. And so she is like such a big person in my life. She really helped me come into myself as I was growing up. And we've been friends for 7 years now, and her family has been such a big role in my life as well. So they got their last name in the book. So these side characters, like I can't pick because they were all so important to me. But I think the most fun to write though was Reina, because I could already see like her second book panning out and like how dramatic that was. So it was fun.
Well, it's also nice writing characters where like you can have a fun time with their dialogue, because she has a lot of like the funniest lines in the book.
Reina, like Anushka talks like that in real life, and like she like I always joke that she's so Gen Z in the way that she talks. Like she teaches me weird words that like I don't know. Like I don't know if you know any off the top of your head. I'm not remembering any, but like. It was just fun to write Reina because she's the same way, like just so undeniably herself, to the point of humor at points.
This is really putting you on the spot, but you just put your sister on the spot, so now it can be balancing out.
It's valid.
Do you have a favorite quote? And if not, because pulling out a quote directly is aggressive, do you have a favorite moment from the book that you can talk about without it being too spoilery?
Yes. I don't have. I mean, I do have a favorite quote, but it's like somewhere in like the archives of my phone, so I'm not gonna go.
You can't recite it off the top of your head verbatim?
Sadly, no. I don't have my book memorized. I should though. But my favorite scene is actually the first scene that I wrote in Kiss My Connection. I wrote it out of order, but the scene was the first thing that came to me, and it's also the only scene that was never edited. So from first draft to final draft, it was the same. And it's the scene where Madhuri has a bunch of like sparkles that fell off her dress from Windsor for senior prom. And like she's just covered in sparkles. And so her mom's like, the solution to this is easy. You can use coconut oil to take off the sparkles. And she remembers when she was 6 years old being made fun of for going to school with coconut oil in her hair because she was smelly. And she's like paralyzed. And in that moment, she's like, do I use this coconut oil at the age of 17, knowing full well it still affects me, but like making that choice anyway? Or do I just show up with sparkles? And she ends up using the coconut oil. And the first, I think, thing that's said to her right after that scene is, you look radiant. And I think that's like the point where Madhuri stops being afraid of being Indian and starts to fully embrace it. So I love that scene so much.
That is a beautiful scene. That's also really cool that it stayed the same throughout the book, that was like one of those cornerstone scenes in the book.
Yeah. I think like one of my CPs, it's also her favorite too. So like I'm like nodding at her right now.
This is going to sound like it's the same question, but I promise it's not. Is there a scene that you looked forward to getting to every time you were doing a revision? Because I find those aren't always the same thing. Like either a point where you're like, okay, I know that I can get through the rest of this now. Sometimes it's usually like later in the book, or just something that you enjoyed getting to revise.
Yeah. So fun fact, there is one scene in this book, or two scenes in this book, that did not exist until draft 10.
Ooh.
Like 2 weeks before my book was due, this new scene was written.
Can we know the scenes, or are you about to say that I'm jumping the gun?
I'm definitely gonna say I love this scene. But there are 2 scenes where Madhuri has to be vulnerable and open about her feelings for Arjun, and like she didn't do that in the first 9 like reiterations of this book, because Madhuri's character is not one for emotions typically. But my editor brought up a good point, and she was like, I think we need to be like, take what's in her head and put it into action. Like, give this poor cinnamon roll boy a little bit of affection on the page, like, please. And so I wrote this scene where she's, confessing her love for him, but she phrases it in such a way where she's like, you've been my best friend for 17 years, but now I want all the other years. I want every single one of them, and I like want your Diwalis, and I want your Christmases, and I want every single big moment in your life, because I love you and you are my destiny. And I think that's the quote. And I loved revising that scene, 1, because it didn't require much revision and I didn't have to go to it that much. But 2, because the whole point of the book is, what happens if you know your destiny? Would you change it? And that scene is where she goes, you are my destiny, but I wholly accept it because I love you. And I think that's like the pinnacle of this book as a whole.
This is also going to sound like the same question. Is there a scene you're excited for readers to read, maybe people in your life that you're excited for them to read this part of the book?
I feel like that was the I love you scene that I described. I'm trying to think if there's another one. I'm excited for people to find Easter eggs in the sense of like, I wrote this book through most of college. So like people that I knew in college are there, like in a little bit, like things that they said. Yeah, Mehreen's like staring at me from the back. I took something she said to me the second time we met and put it word for word on the page, on like page 12.
It's free real estate.
It's free real estate, exactly. And also my friends are just such cool people that they're like characters in and of themselves. They make my life easier in that sense. So I'm excited for people to kind of see that, and for people to also just see bits and pieces of me. I think it's very clear on certain scenes at least that like this is Ananya Devarajan, and if you know me in person, you'll know it.
Do you do the thing where you steal your friends' names for like throwaway characters?
I do.
I love that thing.
I do. That's where the Gregoricks are in here. And then I also have a watch urn somewhere in one of my books. So like I definitely do like collect names like candy and then just use them for my books.
It's fun when you can't think of a name. You're like, all right, pick someone in my life.
Exactly.
What do you hope readers take away from this book? Which is a loaded question.
Yeah, I'm like,
but I'm asking it anyways.
I feel like I've kind of answered bits and pieces of it, but I think the biggest thing that I want readers to take away from it is that this book is about how to not be perfect. And like that is what it boils down to. A lot of people that like Kismat Connection like for that, myself included. A lot of people that don't like Kismat Connection don't like it because of that. And I think that's why it's so important. Like you have this main character who's not perfect and he's openly messy, openly almost sometimes destructive. Like think Devi from Never Have I Ever. Like she's a little bit emotionally like that. She's not like physically getting into altercations, I promise. But like she's emotionally like everywhere because she's 17 and trying to figure out all these problems. So when I want readers to read this, I want them to think, what were you like when you were 17? Were you making every good decision in the book? Were you treating everyone in your life with perfect respect and kindness and appreciation? Like, no, you were still figuring out who you were and you were still finding out what your emotions meant. And that didn't always come out in the greatest of ways, but you learned from it and you became better. And so when you read Kismat Connection, I want you to give Madhuri a chance. I want you to let her get to page 100 when she starts waking up and being like, you know, I need to be better because the people that I love deserve better. And I think that's what the big takeaway from this book is.
This last bullet point we have already talked about, but it is just funny because I wrote, you're graduating this month. Congrats. But you are, and congrats again.
Graduating this week.
Oh my gosh, you're correct. You have already talked about what's next for you as an author, but as a college grad, you said you're going to med school. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because we discussed before this that there's some relevance to some of that in your book.
So there's a minor subplot in my book where the main character's mother has Crohn's disease, and so I want to go to medical school to be a gastrointestinal doctor because that's been something that's really matters to me. And of course, I went through the process of wanting to do anything but gastroenterology because it was just too close to home. Tried all the different specialties and then ended up coming right back to where it mattered the most, and that was GI. Especially for like Indian American diverse communities where a lot of the time that is misdiagnosed, that is like devoted to like weird nutrition. It's not actually weird nutrition. You just don't know what South Indian food looks like. But those are all really important things to me. So it shows up in my books and it shows up in my career. And, that's why I want to go to medical school. And it's why I was even having the motivation to do that while also writing this book.
And again, as someone with a chronic illness of the gastrointestinal kind, I'm grateful that we will have good doctors in that field.
Thank you.
These were going to be rapid fire, but we can actually go into a bit of an explanation for them. And we can also take questions from the audience in a minute after these. So if you want to start thinking about questions, friends to lovers or fake dating. You have both in this book, but I am making you choose.
That's so rude. Why would you make me choose?
You can explain why you love each of them, but you do have to pick.
Okay, that's really difficult for someone like me. I think I'd pick friends to lovers.
Okay.
And the reason why is I think you cannot, thank you. I think it's taste too. I don't like enemies to lovers, which is my hot take that I can get into later.
I do like enemies to lovers, but I like friends to lovers more.
Okay, I relate to that. That's fine. Yes, I agree. But the reason why I picked friends to lovers is I think there's something so great about shared history, about knowing that this person is your person through thick and thin. And then, you get to decide if you want to change this relationship, if you want to risk it, because there might be something even better than that in there. And I just kind of love that you can elevate the friendships that you have and turn them into something even more meaningful if you so take that risk. And so I like friends to lovers for that reason. I like it when they talk about, memories they had from 4 years ago, and they're like, oh, I didn't know I loved you then.
Recontextualizing the memories.
But I love you now. Yeah, it's so cute. And then fake dating, as much as I like it, I do think that fake dating is starting to run its course a little bit, and I've just read too many fake dating books.
Well, it's also much greater suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have ever known someone in real life who fake dates, but I've never seen that
I
happen.
have fake dated someone.
What?
It was at UCI.
You fake dated someone at UCI?
Yeah, for a month.
How did that go?
We'll talk about it later. I'm not going to talk about it in front of a crowd of people. I shouldn't have even brought it up, but
That's the coolest thing.
we'll talk about it later. All right, next question. My phone will unlock. This is a very strange this or that, but as far as personal interests, immunology or astrology?
Immunology. Easy question. Astrology also requires a suspension of disbelief there, where you kind of have to be like, yeah, these are still planets at the end of the day. And I do believe in astrology, but there is a line there. I am so interested in immunology. I think it's so cool. I work in a neuro-oncology lab at UCI, and my lab manager has a PhD in immunology. So whenever she's bored, she just talks about it for hours. So I think just being around that side of my life, I think I spend more time in a lab than I do writing. So because of that familiarity, I would like immunology more. But I like both.
Yeah, it's fair to pick that. It's your career. Dual POV or single POV, and you can answer this both as an author and as a reader. You can do separate answers if you'd like.
Yes. Okay, good.
I'm giving range. I'm giving options.
I speak in essays. I'm sure you guys have realized that by now. I don't breathe when I talk, but there's just so much to say. I like writing dual POV and reading dual POV because I love seeing two sides of the same relationship, and I love, as a reader, being like, oh my god, I saw this hint in chapter 2 from his perspective that's showing up in chapter 16 from her perspective. So I love those kind of little Easter eggs. And in writing dual POV, you get this awesome opportunity to reflect the character's emotions and vulnerabilities on two sides of the page. So your reader also can see that they're maybe not fully healed individuals, but they're healing different parts of each other. And I think that's a good sign of a healthy relationship, in my opinion. So I like dual POV for that. I had to write my second book in single POV though.
Tragedy.
So it's it is 70,000 words of just Raina screaming in her head for a time loop. But
wait, I didn't realize she was the main character of book 2.
Yes.
Oh,
my
did I
sister
miss
gets
this?
her own book. It's a whole thing.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my answer.
Okay,
yes,
cool.
dual POV for both.
All right, fair, very fair. And then the final question, which I suppose I will allow you to pick both of these if you want, because it would feel antithetical to your book if I made you choose. But destiny or choose your own fate?
Destiny.
Oh,
I don't even want to choose both. I think that when you work really hard and when you do everything you can to make something work, the universe makes it work for you, and it becomes part of your destiny. So I don't think you need to choose your own fate. I think you need to just.
The fly had words to say.
Apparently that was the wrong answer. But yeah, I think you just need to do what you love and do it with passion and with the purest of intentions, and it becomes your destiny. Maybe that's my optimistic way of looking at it, because that's kind of how I've lived my life. That's how my family lives their life, where you work hard and then the universe makes it yours. But that's kind of also the point I wanted taken from this book. So destiny would win that.
Nice. Okay, we can take questions from the audience if anyone has questions. We can also all just stare at each other too if we want to do that.
No pressure at all. I will hold it against you.
I was going to say, I'll pressure them. These are your friends. I'll pressure them. Yes. Hello.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, good question. I love talking about my writing community because I have been so blessed with the greatest community possible. So I actually met all of them on Twitter. I think I was just very openly talking about my writing in that like metaverse, I guess. And like I'm not one to approach people on social media. I'm a very extroverted person in real life, but I won't do it online. So I think all of my CPs did the thing where they like slid into my DMs and they were like, "We like the book that you're talking about on the internet. Can we read it? And in return, I'll give you mine." And so that kind of was how it started. And then I think your CPs become your writing community when you end up being able to confide in them about the harder parts of writing, about the imposter syndrome, about the parts that we maybe don't talk about as much in public. And my writing community is 5 people. They're from different genres. They're of different backgrounds, different like entire life experiences, but they have been there for me for the last 5 years, 4 to 5 years for some of them. And so they've seen every book I've ever written. They will continue to see every book I've ever written until they're tired of me. But I think that's like my key to finding a writing community is you can't force that. And I think it often starts as not feeling like anything. And then one day you end up having that conversation where you become a person to them and vice versa. And then suddenly they're with you for the rest of time. So that I don't know if that answered your question. That's a great answer. Okay.
You can pick people too.
Others? I'm scared a little bit. Yeah, good question. So Bharatanatyam, I actually danced Bharatanatyam for about 10 years, I think. So I did it for a big part of my life. It's very important to me. It's a South Indian classical dance form that we don't often see represented in the media because it's not Bollywood. And so I knew that that had to be a really big part of this book, and it's a really big part of Madhuri figuring out what kind of Indian she wants to be. It was not hard for me to describe Bharatanatyam because when I went into writing it, I knew I was not going to be the author that sat down and held your hand and explained to you an element of my culture when I was not given that hand to hold as I was experiencing American culture for the first time. So my mentality and my entire team is American individuals, like not Indian. So my agent is American, my editor is American, my publicity, my marketing team, they're all American. They never had issues with the culture of my book because they respected my writing and my identity so deeply that if they didn't understand something, they searched it up. And they did the work to make sure that they could be, proper individuals representing my book. And that's what my closest friends have done for me too. Like everyone important in my life, if they did not understand something that was important to me, they put in the work to figure out why it was important to me. So I did the work of defining terms, of giving you context clues. But if that's not enough, then I kind of ask you to do your research and see if you can figure out why this is important and why it was on the page. It's time to be real?
It's time to be real.
Are you guys okay with being in a Be Real? I was like planning this all day.
Okay. It's your event.
You want to be this?
Oh my gosh, mine won't load.
There we go. Thank you guys.
The way mine won't load.
Yes.
You can pick more questions while I load my Be Real.
Tara, hi. Oh my god.
Continue. Ignore me.
Book cover, release date. Honestly, it didn't hit me until I walked into this room today that this book was out. And I think I've told people that I never really realized what it meant to publish a book until I saw my friends and families like holding it right now, and I knew it would only ever hit me now. I'm like tearing up right now as I talk about it because it's just such a big moment. But I think the reason, or the moment I knew that I had done something right for my 17-year-old self was when a reader actually sent me an email, and it was like 2 pages long. It was mostly in caps lock. She was 15 years old, and she was in Miss Kim's class, who's actually right here. But she emailed me, and she was like, "This was the book I needed. Thank you so much for writing it. I felt seen by this book." And that's when I knew that I had done it. Like, I don't necessarily care about the success of Kismat Connection as long as it's found that community of girls who need it and of boys who need it. And so now that it has found one person in that community, I feel good. And now that I'm here at this launch event and it feels real that I am officially a published author as of today, I also like feel great. So I hope that answers your question. So cute. Thank you. I know, it was the best. I cried after I got that email. I'm not going to pick you again just because there are other people, not because I'm not being nice to you, I promise. Morgan. That's a really good question. I wish you'd run it by me before so I could like sound really intelligent on the spot. But I think the hardest part of writing this book was revising it. I'm good at revising. I can do it very fast. My biggest revision took me 48 hours. So I'm good at it, but it's hard for me to part ways with something that I've written because my brain immediately thinks in extremes of like 0 or 100% black or white. So I think, oh, if I lose the scene, the book will never be good ever again. But that's not true. So like the hardest part of this process has been trusting myself that if I remove something, it's for the better, and that I'm doing this to be better as a writer and trusting my growth and my development in this field. The best part of it has been finding that community of readers who are like, I'm super messy, just like Madhuri. Oh my God, like I love it. And so that was really great. And also just understanding a little bit more about myself as I was writing it. I did not realize how much I loved love and how much of a hopeless romantic I am until I wrote this book and I was like, this is what I want in real life. I want an Arjun to treat me this way. And so, you know, I was always the kind of person who would deny that side of me publicly, but now I'm so openly like, yes, I'm a lover girl. This is fantastic. And I think it was great figuring out that side of me through this book. Allie. That's such a good question. Oh my gosh. Yes, so Arjun is someone that I'm inspired by every day. He is the healthiest communicator throughout this book. If he has a feeling, if he feels hurt by you, if he feels loved by you, he verbalizes it. Because his mentality is like life is too short to hold something in like that. So I was never really that person. I think I was really guarded from like various life experiences that had made me that way. And then I wrote this book and I wrote Arjun and I saw how he got true love by opening himself up to true love, even if it meant risking being hurt by it. And so like the way he communicated, the way he was optimistic, the way he was just like wore his heart on his sleeve, I had lost that side of myself before I'd written Kismat Connection, and now I have it. So that fully comes from him. Quinn. A close friend was me. I said this to him about 2 weeks ago. Can you repeat the second half of your question really quickly? Okay. I didn't. So I did not know it was a double-edged sword until it had hit me. But I kind of erred on the side of this is my truth, so I'm going to put it all on the page. And then it became a little too truthful. And to a point where I didn't know if I wanted random strangers kind of reading that side of me, especially because, like, I had written Kismat Connection as a form of therapy. So, like, I'd gotten those feelings out. I had processed them on the page, but they didn't need to be something everyone knew. And so I think figuring out that line for yourself is what would help make that double-edged sword easy to balance. Because once I realized, like, wait, this is not something that needs to be on the page, it left. And it was replaced by a scene that did good emotional work for the characters without revealing too much of, I think, me as a person. Because I didn't want this book to be a self-insert, and as much as I am talking about how I relate to it, it's not a self-insert. Madhuri and Arjun are very distinct and unique characters who are, like, at max, like, 10% relatable to me. But that's because they started off as 100%, and then I had to tone it down when that double-edged sword became a little too painful. I love this question. So
It sounds like you're establishing your cinematic universe.
I am. I call it. Morgan actually coined this. She calls it the Madhuri-verse. So
Ooh,
like
I like
every
that.
character is like distantly related to Madhuri Iyer. But when I first got my book deal, I actually met my agent and my publicist and my editor in New York City to have a lunch with them. And my agent was like, "What if you just kind of like slip this idea you have to them over the lunch that they're paying for? Like they'll just forget about it in 2 years if they don't like it. Like it's not a big deal." So I like the head of the publishing house was there and everything too, and I was like, "What do you guys think about me creating this like Ananya Devarajan cinematic universe where a character in one book becomes the character in the next book, and on and on and on until I run out of ideas? And the common theme is how romance and love is magical, and how we can have fantasy magical elements in our day-to-day life, and like that could help make us love each other better." And then my team was on board. They loved it. They were like, "Yes, of course you can do it. We like your second book idea, which is already about the younger sister of the main character from book 1. And my third book that I'm pitching this summer, because I've like kind of already figured it out, is going to be about the best friend from book 2. She's the main character of book 3. So as long as they keep paying me, I'm gonna keep doing it." Good question. Thank you. I wanted to talk about this.
Think we can probably do like 1 or 2 more questions?
Jordan? That's such a good question. Jordan is an educator. She thinks like an educator, and so she asked me really intelligent questions.
Better than any of my questions were.
No. But so yes, the reason why Madhuri is associated with sun and like warmth and stuff is that that is something you see when you get to know her. Everyone else kind of sees her as this really dark entity that like is very closed off and maybe not the nicest person because she's so hurt by the things that people have done to her. But once you know her, she just like loves so fiercely, and like it feels like the sun is shining on you. So that was why that symbolism was there. Arjun, I'd give him like a star. And the reason why I'd give Arjun a star is because he's always there, whether you realize it or not. And I mean that not in a creepy way, but in the sense of once you have Arjun's loyalty, you have it for life. Even if you hurt him, even if you maybe are not the nicest to him, if he has decided at one point in time that you are worthy of his love, you will have it. And I think people like that are rare, just like how it's rare that you always see a star in the sky. But that is what he is, I think. Of course.
Okay, maybe 1 more as the last question. Does anyone have anything?
You came. Hi, Sahil. What's your question? Yes. Okay, yeah, it's a good question. For context, I've always argued, Sahil's one of my best friends from college, but I've always argued with Sahil because I'm like, it's really hard to write a romance novel. And he's like, why? Everyone knows how it ends. And I'm like, well, that's the point. Imagine you have this readership, which is, by the way, the largest and longest sustained readership in all of publishing is romance. So, like, we love romance in this household.
We do.
But how do you convince these readers to read 300 pages of your book if they know exactly how it's going to end? And I think that's what makes it difficult, right? So for me, I knew it was going to end with happily ever after. I knew it was going to start with these 2 childhood best friends, one of which has been in love with her for 17 years and the other one who has no clue, right? But everything in between, I realized that I wanted their love story to be defined by who they were as people. So a lot of the in-between of Kismat Connection is not about them going on dates. It's not about them, going to prom. Like, there are a few scenes like that that are very much like high school teen romance. But the middle of this book comes from their individual journeys to being better people, to being better adults, and how that kind of is like test run on each other. Like, Madhuri learning elements of how to be nicer and how to be more accepting of herself. Once she figures it out, that is directly translated to her relationship with Arjun. And Arjun realizing that you can ask for love, but you can't force someone to love you, and at some point you should be okay with standing up for yourself, like that arc, that gets taken out on Madhuri as well, and it makes their relationship stronger. So I think that's what makes people kind of push through this book, because it's not just the dates, it's also the human beings, the individuals that are growing up and getting better, and you kind of want to stick along for that.
That was an excellent one to end on.
Thank you.
So, congratulations again. Everyone's very excited. I think you will be signing books after. And thank you everyone for the questions.
Thank you for coming. I think we're signing books now, yes?
I believe you are.
Yeah, I can stay here and sign them for you. Yeah, that works. Thank you. Yes, bonus be real.